Oh, kia ora. Kia ora, Grey City. How you doing? We are in the second week of this brilliant summer series we're doing called Reel Theology. And it's a chance to look at the way that faith in Jesus and the films of today intersect. You know, movies are the stories of our day, the literature of our generation. And so much of the current thinking and philosophies and even worldviews of our modern age get poured into media and particularly in movies. And so the idea of this series, and we're in the second week now, the idea behind this is it's a chance to look at the stories of our age that may not, many of them, have any explicit Christian content, but to think about what the stories are saying from a Christian worldview. Sometimes that means there's lots in there that we can celebrate and enjoy. Sometimes it means there's a critique that needs to be given. But this is an opportunity for us to explore really what is being said through the media, through the narratives, the stories of our world. So in this second week, we're exploring this movie called One Life. It had its world premiere in September of 2023, and it's the story, based on the true story, of an Englishman, a British man by the name of Nicholas Winton. The story is set both in the 1980s, but also flashing back to the 1930s as Europe was descending into towards World War II. Nicholas Winton was a London stockbroker, at that time just a young man, who heard about the tragedy of Jewish children in Czechoslovakia and the city of Prague who were under threat as the Nazis began to encroach and take more and more of Czechoslovakia before the beginning of the war. And Nicholas Winton's heart went out to these kids, and he went to Prague and visited there and met up with some people and began to play a significant part in rescuing Jewish children away before the Nazis consumed Czechoslovakia and they would have been sent to concentration camps. So One Life is telling the story, the true story of Nicholas Winton. All up, he would save over 600 children from the Nazi regime before World War II broke out. But for 50 years, Nicholas Winton's story went untold, until a scrapbook that he had that contained the photographs and the information about the children he and others had saved. The scrapbook came into the hands of a museum director who passed it on to the producer of a television show in Britain called That's Life. And one day, Nicholas Winton was invited to join the studio audience of That's Life as they told his story and showed his scrapbook. And the story just galvanised Great Britain to the point that they invited him back the next week along with his wife, Gret. And it became this moving scene that you might have seen it over the last few years. It was spread around on social media. But this movie, One Life, that tells his story, towards the end of the movie, they show what happened the second week when Nicholas Winton and his wife were sitting in the studio audience as they shared about the children that he had saved 50 years earlier. Have a look at this clip. This movie, One Life, is phenomenal. It's a little slow in places, but it's worth watching the movie, and I'd recommend it to you for some of those scenes at the end. Rochelle and I have watched it twice in the last few weeks, and both times we've got to these moments when Nicholas Winton is being recognised for what he did 50 years before. And I have to be honest, we both had tears in our eyes each time as we watch this memorable scene that the movie One Life recreates so beautifully. In all, Nicholas Winton and those who assisted him, they managed to save 669 Jewish children from the Nazi regime. And someone has calculated that as they became adults and married and had children of their own and then grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the survivors who owe their lives to Nicholas Winton as that generation have had their own and future generations, the survivors now number over 6,000 people that are alive because of the work of Nicholas Winton. But what's even more beautiful is in this movie and the clip that you've just seen, it was the actual children that he had rescued that were in the studio audience in 1988 when the That's Life show was filmed. Well, in 2022-23, as they were filming the One Life movie, the actors and actresses that we just saw in that clip are the children playing the role of their parents who had been rescued at the beginning of World War II. So it's actually a really lovely movie, and the way they pulled that together is just, I think, quite stunning. But the key idea of the movie really is simply this, and this is the key really theme that I want to draw out and have us think about for a few minutes. It's that one single life can make a huge impact. One single life can make a huge impact. You see, Nicholas Winton wasn't a famous person in 1930s London. He was a stockbroker, he was an ordinary person, he wasn't uber wealthy, he didn't have significant friends, he didn't own a media company, or he wasn't a politician or related to a politician. There was nothing that special about him. He was quite an ordinary man, but he found out about what was happening in Prague. He went to Prague and had a look, and he saw these refugee camps and all of these people that were trying to escape the Nazis as the Nazis were now closing in on Czechoslovakia itself. And he felt like someone had to do something. And as he saw the need, he just simply decided to be the someone who would do something. And he began to find others to help him and began this a wonderful scheme of rescuing trainloads of children from Prague and getting them to the city of London. Nicholas Winton is not a follower of Jesus. The movie itself makes it very clear that he was all the way through his life an agnostic. But as I think about this as a follower of Jesus, the Bible so often reminds us that followers of Christ, when we are very ordinary people, each of us, our solitary life, can have a huge impact. And there's a couple of stories in the Bible that remind me of this. One of them is the story of a little girl whose name we do not know. It's found in 2 Kings chapter 5. In that period of time where the nation of Israel had been split into two, a couple of hundred years after King David had ruled. And she is part of the northern kingdom of Israel that's almost in constant warfare with its neighbours through the 8th century BC. And at some point, this young girl, probably primary age child, was snatched up by a raiding party and taken away as a prisoner of war. She probably never would have seen her family again. She would have been separated from her parents and siblings for the rest of her life. She was sold as a slave to a wealthy family in the country of Aram, which is modern Syria. And she ends up looking after this family where there's a tragic problem. 2 Kings chapter 5, just let me read you a couple of verses that begin that story. It says, now Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was the general commanding the armies of this nation. It says he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. That's the tragedy of this man's life. But then we read this. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and taken captive this young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria. That's the prophet Elisha. He would cure him of his leprosy. This little girl speaks a single verse of scripture to her mistress, married to this great general. And she didn't have to say a word. She could have chosen to keep silent about the prophet Elisha and what God was doing through him. She could have chosen to repay this family who were part of this nation that had taken her into captivity. But she saw a need and she chose to be the someone who did something. And because of that, Naaman's life was changed forever and he became a follower of the one true God. It also makes me think there's another story in the New Testament about a young boy this time. Again, we don't know his name. He actually gets no lines in the Bible, unlike this girl who gets one verse. But Jesus' ministry is growing in the Gospels. Crowds are flocking to him. And one day, Jesus spends the entire day teaching people until his disciples, his closest followers, come to him and say, they've got nothing to eat, we need to send them away. And Jesus, challenging their faith and their leadership, says, well, you give them something to eat, and they've got nothing. And one little boy steps forward with the tiny little lunch that he had brought with him that day, a little bit of bread, a couple of little fish, but he volunteers, he steps forward and he gives those to Jesus. And he was someone who saw a need. He was someone who did something. And through his generous actions, Jesus was able to multiply that food and feed thousands upon thousands of people. And we read the stories of the Bible, and so often we get captivated by the great heroes of the Bible, the Abraham, the Esther, the David. But there's also these remarkable stories of ordinary people who actually allow God to use them to do pretty amazing things. And if I think there's a theme that flows out of this movie, One Life, not a Christian movie, not based on a Christian person, but it's a reminder to us as followers of Jesus, one single life can have a huge impact for him. One single life, if we're willing to see the need, whatever that need is, and reach out to someone, we can have an amazing impact. And when I say a huge impact, not all of us are going to save 669 children from Nazis. But that little girl chose to speak up, and she saved one life, the life of her master. And we can have an impact that we may never understand the magnitude of that and the repercussions and the ripples that flow. But when we see a need, when we choose to sponsor a child, when we choose to say an encouraging word to someone who's down, when we choose to put an arm around someone who's grieving, when we choose to go or support someone else to go on a short-term mission, when we choose to speak up and share our faith with a friend, when we choose to invite someone, we have no idea the impact that our simple, single life can have when we choose to simply follow the call of Jesus and be the someone who does something. And that, I think, is the key theme that we can take out of this movie. One life, one single life can have a huge impact. There's a second theme, though, that I want to draw out of this that I think is really significant. The interesting thing about this movie is it's called One Life, and it zeroes in on this one person, Nicholas Winton, and the impact that his life made. But the fact is, and as you watch the movie, what you realise is it wasn't one life. It wasn't only him who did this. He was actually part of a team of people, some of which played a much more dangerous role than he did. He visited the city of Prague in the modern Czech Republic, but then he went back to London and he operated from the London end. But in Prague, he had team members who literally risked their lives until the Nazis were marching along the very streets beneath their office. So, for example, in the movie, you meet this amazing woman named Doreen Warrener, who heads up the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia. Or she has a colleague named Trevor Chadwick. Trevor takes each train that they have and goes with the children on the train from Prague to London, delivers them safely to the team in London, and then he would return to Prague for the next group of children. These people risk their lives. Another character in the movie is Nicholas Winton's mother, Babby, who's brilliantly played by Helena Bonham Carter. And actually, there's this team around them. It's not only Nicholas Winton. It's not only his one life. It's actually a team of ordinary people who are operating in community. And it's a powerful example that when we give and serve and love, often we may choose to step out, but so often we are operating together in community with each other. It's brilliantly portrayed in this next clip from the movie. Have a look. I love that last line, an army of the ordinary. And friends, that's what we are as the church. That's what we are as the body of Christ and as a community of Jesus followers. In May of June of last year, we did a series in the Beatitudes, in the blessing statements that Jesus uses to introduce his very famous Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6 and 7. And we called that series Influences because of what Jesus says right after he uses these Beatitudes. He says all these blessed statements where he says his followers are blessed not because of the wealth we have or the influence or the popularity that everyone looks for, but because we grieve over our sin and we throw ourselves on his grace and we treat each other with gentleness and humility. And he makes these blessing statements, and then he makes this profound comment about the influence that ordinary, beatitude, broken people can have in this world in a very countercultural way. And here's what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16. Just reading a few lines there. Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth." Verse 14, "You are the light of the world, and a town built on a hill cannot be hidden." Verse 16, "So in the same way, let your light shine before others, so they would see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." And what Jesus is saying there is that his ordinary followers have an extraordinary influence in this world, not because we're amazing, but because when we throw ourselves on his grace and let that grace shine through us, we impact people in unbelievable ways. And what's significant about that passage is that all of it is plural. It's not just that you as an individual are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. It's not just me, it's all of us. Jesus is saying you all are the salt of the earth. All of you together are the light of the world. So all of you, let your light shine. And what Jesus is really saying in that powerful part of the Sermon on the Mount is exactly what this movie is describing. The church is the army of the ordinary. And together, when each of us take our one single life and follow the lead of the Spirit and allow him to use us, when we choose to step forward and be the someone who does something in response to a need that we see around us, we have this huge impact, but we do that together. We do that in community. And in a sense, that's almost one of the problems I have with this movie of One Life. This movie celebrates the life of this one man, Nicholas Winton. The TV show that is portrayed at the end of the movie, or the two TV shows that happen one week after another, are all about Nicholas Winton. In fact, after that happened, Queen Elizabeth II ended up knighting him, and he became Sir Nicholas Winton. But as you watch the movie, what you realise is it wasn't just him alone. It was Doreen, it was Trevor, it was his mum, Babby, it was others who worked together in community. And they did so without having a television show in their honour. They don't have a movie about them necessarily, they're just part players, part characters in this movie about Winton. None of them got honoured by the Queen. In fact, by the time Nicholas Winton's story came to light 50 years later in 1988, everyone else who had helped him as part of that team, they'd all passed away. But the truth is they hadn't done it for recognition. They had done it because it was the right thing to do, because there was a need and they were in a position to meet it. And the truth is that's how most of us operate, isn't it? We don't see a need, we don't give, we don't go, we don't serve, we don't love, we don't comfort, we don't encourage because we want recognition. We simply do it because that's what Jesus calls us to do. It reminds me of the powerful words of US President Harry Truman. He said, "It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit." And the truth is, friends, I think this movie reminds us that one single life can have a huge impact. And often that impact is done in community. There's a final theme that I just want to touch on from this movie that I think is incredibly powerful as well. And it's the theme of regret. Because the truth is, in this movie, not every child will make it out. There will come a moment in the movie when no more children will be able to escape from the Czech Republic. And even when the avenue is still open and trains are still flowing, there are times, like in this next scene, when some of the children disappear before they can get the documentation all ready. And the regret of that is going to be something that Nicholas Winton would struggle with for all of his life. Have a look. In many ways, this movie reminds me a little bit of Schindler's List. In fact, Nicholas Winton has been nicknamed the British Schindler. But at the end of Schindler's List, Oskar Schindler has to run because he's considered a Nazi, so he has to run for his life. But there's this powerful scene at the end of that movie where he's taking his ring and his Nazi pin and he is consumed not by the number of lives that he has saved, that the Jewish people crowding around him are so thankful for, but what fills his mind is the regret of how many more he might have saved. And in a sense, that's what happens to Nicholas Winton in this movie. As the movie progresses, what you realise is that he isn't cocky or arrogant about the lives of the people he saved. He will end up saving and being honoured for saving the lives of 669 children. But what you realise as the movie unfolds and is beautifully and powerfully portrayed by Anthony Hopkins, who plays the older Nicholas Winton, is that he is gripped not by the lives he has saved, but by the regret of the lives he doesn't save. In the clip we just watched, the reporter is interviewing him as train number 4 has just arrived in London with over 100 Jewish children. And they're talking about the next trains that are coming in, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9. And as the movie progresses, you've realised that those next 4 trains will arrive in London. But train number 9 never makes it. Train number 9 is filled with children at the railway station in Prague on the very day that Germany invaded Poland and that Britain declares war on Germany, and it's now World War II. And that train would never come. Those children never escape from Prague, and almost all of them end up being exterminated in the concentration camps that Nazi Germany would set up and run. And what Anthony Hopkins portrays so amazingly in this story is Nicholas Winton's huge regret. In fact, towards the end of the movie, we watched earlier the clip of the second TV show where he was honoured by the entire studio audience being filled with the children that he had saved. The week before, he'd been on that same TV show and had met a couple of the children he had saved. And in the week in between those shows, there is a scene where his wife, Gret, is looking for him at home and she can't find him. And she goes down to the pool in their backyard, and he is sitting there on one of the deck chairs by the pool, sobbing his heart out about train number 9 and these hundreds of Jewish children that never escaped. And what it's a powerful reminder of, friends, is that when we all get to the end of our lives, we are never going to regret not having a bigger house. We're never going to regret career choices and advances that maybe we could have had. We're never going to regret not having masses of money or, the trips we might have made. But I do wonder whether we will get to the end of our lives, this one single life. And I wonder if there'll be things, opportunities that we wish we'd grasped, and promptings of the Spirit we wish we'd followed, and the whispers of God that we wished we'd listened to. Because that's the key thing that shines through this powerful movie. That how much more might he have done? Even so, he did so much. One single life, friends, can have a huge impact. But let's not get to the end of our lives and regret the opportunities that we might have missed. As we come to the end of this movie then, One Life, I have to finish with a short reflection on the one life that matters most. If we're going to say, coming out of this movie, this key idea that one single life can have a huge impact, then the person that is most true of is the Lord Jesus Christ. His one life has impacted all of us. He has saved many, many more than 669 people, and he has saved us from things worse than Nazi Germany. He saved us from our very sin and brokenness and wickedness. because he came and stepped into our world and revealed the Father and died for our sins and rose again, and his single life has had a huge impact that continues to reverberate through time. And he never received the recognition for that. But one day he will. Not in a cheap television show, but the final book of the Bible, Revelation, reminds us that one day Jesus will rightly get all of the accolades and the worship and the honour that he so richly deserves. Because one single life can have a huge impact. And that was never more true than the life and ministry of the risen Jesus. So I want to finish with these words from Revelation chapter 5. It says, "Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000, and they encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders, and in a loud voice they were saying, 'Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wisdom and wealth and strength and honour and glory and praise.'" His one single life has so deeply impacted our lives. Let's make sure that our lives now impact others for his glory. God bless.